All right.
And I'm Fernando Samaniego. I'm one of the San Francisco Running Company gang. Yeah, I'm also enjoying this summer doing some adventures. And as Ted just mentioned, I just came back from the JMT last Sunday. So that's been an exciting time this summer.
That's good. Yeah, if people who are listening, if you're ever on what we used to have the group runs, these guys are regulars on the group runs that start at the Mill Valley store. So we wanted to start the discussion with how'd you come up with the idea? Why the Ray Lakes FKT? And I think Io was the instigator in this one.
I'm always the instigator. So the Ray Lakes Loop is just a very well-known route in the Sierra that I've heard about over the years living in California. And I thought about doing this route because one, it's a loop. So logistically, you don't need someone to pick you up on the other side. It's not like a point to point. It's also a good distance that's doable in a day. So 40 miles I felt like was an approachable place for an FKT attempt in the Sierra. I didn't want to tackle something as huge as the JMT or some of the other longer routes. I wanted to do something that I knew I could finish in a reasonable amount of time first. And it's famous for being really, really beautiful. And I'd never seen that section of the JMT. I'd never been to Kings Canyon. So I just approached it as a really cool adventure and a goal for the summer. Because there were no races, and like my favorite racing distance is 50K to 50 miles. So in terms of time on feet, that sort of falls into like maybe a slightly longer or harder 50-mile kind of effort.
And you recruited Fernando because he's just a good partner?
Well, I recruited Fernando because his stoke brings so much energy to the trails. And I also would feel better knowing that there was someone else out there with me because the back half of the loop, you know, it is pretty remote. When you're halfway, you are literally 20 miles from any road or parking lot or anything like that. And it just is always a good feeling to know that someone else is out there trying to run fast on the same trail.
And what day
Plus,
of the week
I know
was
he's always up for an adventure.
And what day of the week was it again? Was it a weekend or a weekday?
So I started seriously looking into logistics maybe like 2 weeks before we drove out, just gathering information because one, I'd never been to Kings Canyon. With the coronavirus, regulations in place, it seems like every county has kind of different regulations and every national park has different rules about how they're operating. So luckily, Kings Canyon is different from Yosemite in the sense that there's no reservation system. So you can drive up day of and just pay the entrance fee and go. And actually you can prepay for any day that you want park entrance and you just drive through. I think the most challenging part of the planning was actually figuring out what to do about where to stay the night before, because Ted, as you mentioned earlier, the trailhead, if you're trying to do the 40-mile loop, is 90 miles from Fresno. And between Fresno and Rhodes End, there's basically only lodges or campgrounds, and all the lodges in the national park are closed. They might be open now, but definitely earlier in July, they were all closed. And all of the national park campgrounds are closed, except for like 2 right next to the entrance of the national park. And the trailhead is actually probably another hour from where you enter at Grants Grove. So it's not easy to find like a close place to stay unless you can get a spot at these very few campgrounds that are close to the trailhead, and all of them were closed. We had counted on doing dispersed camping along 180 while we're still in the national forest area. But we got there and then we saw the ranger sign that had been tacked up like 2 weeks beforehand or something about, the new regulation of no dispersed camping. So we kind of had to do like a little problem solving moment. It was, we left on a Friday, and the plan was to camp Friday night and then drive to the trailhead and run the loop on Saturday morning. So Friday evening, we're like trying to figure out where to stay, what to do. And luckily there's one service station that was open between the front entrance and the trailhead called Kings Canyon Lodge, which used to be an actual lodge, but burned down in a fire. So now it's just a gas station, ice cream store, and luckily campground. So we drove back to this gas station, and the guy there said he had camp spots open. And so we paid him $25 and camped there for the night. And that was about 45 minutes from the trailhead. So it turned out to be perfect.
Yeah, that lodge was burned down in 2015 in what's called the Rough Fire. It was like a 140,000 acre fire there. So it's also actual private land too within the national forest. Those guys live there year round.
Yeah, so other than figuring out the logistics of where to go and where to stay, I did a little, just recon. I actually read Lior Pantalat's trail reports he's done the Ray Lakes Loop at least twice, but that's reported on the FKT site. I'm sure he's done it many more times than what he's reported, just to try and get an idea of what the trail is like, while still leaving some pleasant surprises for the experience. And we just planned to get up as early as we could on Saturday morning and try to hit the trail. I think I had planned on about 9 hours, given the distance, the terrain, and the altitude. I thought it would take about 9 hours.
And Fernando, did you just go along with it, or how was it?
Yeah, I mean, definitely when you have an adventure planned, I'm always game. It's usually a lot of fun. I had already done the High Sierra Trail in Kings Canyon some time ago, like 3 years ago. So I didn't know exactly that area, but I was very excited to explore other parts of that national park. And yeah, I mean, I just literally, 40 miles with a 12,000 foot pass. 10 hours is the time to break. Okay, all that. And I thought that was a good time to shoot for.
Well, I think we both actually had really good preparation. So the trail itself, the route, didn't seem as daunting as it may have, because over 4th of July, we had gone to Mammoth with some other friends and done huge runs and adventures at altitude on similar mountain terrain with big passes. So we definitely had a good training block to prepare for tackling the route.
Yeah, and yeah, from training perspective, like I've been doing 6 to 8 hour runs in the Sierra for the last like probably month before the run. So I was kind of prepared to do a 40-mile loop if that was the plan.
Great. So I think people will move on to equipment here because I think people are interested in that. One thing to note is you guys elected to not use poles, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're not pole people, or?
So if you look at like the elevation per distance of the Ray Lakes Loop, it's, yeah, you have a big climb up to Glen Pass, but it's under 8,000 feet of elevation gain and loss for 40 miles, which is actually not a lot. You know, Ted, if you've run like Lake Sonoma or North Face 50 mile, those are 10,000 feet of elevation gain and loss over 50 miles. So in terms of like steepness or the need for poles, I just feel like they wouldn't help you go any faster on that terrain. And I think with that, knowing that kind of elevation gain or loss, I would definitely not choose to use poles. If it was, say, 12,000 feet of elevation gain and loss over 40 miles, then I may have made a different decision to use poles because it would be steeper. But I think it's all quite runnable terrain too. There's some sections when you're higher up, over 10,000 feet. If anyone that's done the Eastern Sierra Trails or the JMT knows, there's notorious for having big stone steps. Like you're probably power hiking stairs like that, but a lot of it you can still run up and down the hills. And I just feel like personally, I am faster without poles with that kind of elevation over that distance. And it saves you also the time of like taking the poles out and putting them back because there's many long sections where you would just run, like it's very cruisy or rolling or net downhill trail that you would not be helped by poles.
Yeah, same here. I think it was a big climb that if we had more feet per mile in that climb, probably I would have gone for it. Also, I haven't trained much with poles. And I think when I'm trying to do a big effort, it's always about doing what I've been training with. And if I didn't train with poles, I prefer to maybe suffer a little bit more, but make sure that I'm comfortable with what I've been doing in the last block of training.
And for those of you listening who want to do it in a human time, poles are recommended for us slower people. What watches did you guys have? Like, just name your watch, your shoes, your pack, and mostly the food brands you carried. Obviously, you carried goo, but.
Yeah, so I wore a Garmin Forerunner 235, which is like a pretty old school watch. It's probably at least 5 years old. And its battery life is not the best. So I thought that this loop would actually be on the very edge of how long the battery would last. And luckily it lasted. I think right now it's good for about 10 hours. So that's another reason I wanted to run definitely under 10 hours. It's like before my watch dies. And then I had just prototype shoes from Under Armour for trail shoes. And I had a Camelback Ultra Pro women's vest, a running vest with 2 soft flasks. And then I also carried the Catadine Be-Free 0.6 liter filter flasks, which are such a great tool in the wilderness, and especially for traveling light and also moving faster. And in terms of nutrition, I brought 2 chocolate chip cookies, a couple of bars, and then like 4 Stroop waffles, and I think I had 7 gels and electrolyte pills.
So let's say like a Sonoma, like you've won like Sonoma 50,
Mhm.
would same calorie intake, or were you a lot less or more liquid? I mean, just so people have a comparison, like, is that a
Yeah,
lot for you, or is that kind of like,
so
that's a 40
it's a
mile run for
lot
me?
more solid food than I would typically consume in a 50-mile race at sea level. I just feel like in the mountains, I need something more substantial, especially if we're going up to almost 12,000 feet and being at altitude. I just consume so many more calories at a higher effort. For like a 50-mile race at sea level, I might start munching on things like stroop waffles, but after the first 2 hours, I'm like just powering a
Coke.
gel every 30 minutes.
Fernando?
And I took the shoes. I took the Ultra Timps, Timp 2. I actually love that shoe for, especially for the Sierra. It's just great grip. I've been using Ultras for a while, so that's kind of my go-to shoe for any long effort. Um, I use Scratch for electrolytes. They work great for me. Like I don't use water at all. Every water bowl I have, I just put one of the hydration packages with Scratch, and I usually budget 1 per hour. So I ended up using around 8 of them, plus an additional electrolytes. They have like a wellness package that I always take for emergencies that I needed this time. But yeah, I use Scratch, and I took Stroop waffles as you. Like I think I knew that if you're gonna hike up a 12,000 foot pass, the effort cannot be uh, as hard, so I couldn't just be using gels from the get-go. Probably took like 10 Stroop waffles. I always carry more than I need. Same filter as you. I think that filter I took 2 for the JMT, and they're a great tool. And an Ultra Spire vest that you can put the soft flasks on the back, that I like a lot, just to be able to run without having anything in front of me but food. And that was basically it.
So you guys were basically treating your water on the fly with a filter. I mean, so
Right.
a lightweight filter. I use the, not forgetting the name of
The
it,
Sawyer?
but Sawyer, yeah. And
Yeah.
that works really well too. So the next thing I wanted to touch upon was, since you guys, and you know, had mentioned this, at some point you are literally 20 miles from any kind of help or road. What was your plan B, your safety? What was your safety net on this? Or did you think about the safety net? Because this is, yes, there's a lot of people in the JMT. There are a lot of people in this loop, but at the same time, you are in the wilderness. So
Yeah, we actually got the Garmin InReach Mini GPS locator devices. Yes, exactly. And we use them so you can turn on the live tracking and share that with your friends or family so they can actually follow along, and it'll send your location, say every 10 minutes or however long you set the interval for. And you can also use it to actually send SMS or text messages to anyone. Really, you can set up a contacts list. So, you know, before we left on the trip, the other thing about doing this loop is that you are actually out of cell reception for a very long time before you even get to the trailhead. So for example, where we were camping had absolutely no cell reception. Basically, when you start driving out of Fresno, you start losing cell reception. So having the InReach was very helpful because you can still send text messages to other people's cell phones. So you can message people who don't even have the InReach. It just goes to their cell phone through SMS. And then when you're actually start tracking and sending your live location, people can see your location be updated through a web portal. So that's another, you know, backup safety thing. If you tell someone that you're heading out on the wilderness on this 40-mile loop, you know, check the link. I'm planning to start at 7 a.m. on Saturday. And if I don't move for 2 hours, send help. It also has an SOS button on the device. So I think that gave me a lot of peace of mind, knowing that if something did happen, then I at least had a way of communicating. Because I think that's one of the most challenging things about being out in the wilderness is that you're disconnected. You know, unless you have a locator beacon like a Spot or Garmin InReach, you are just hoping that someone comes across you. And we were on a very well established, popular trail that not only has backpackers on it, but there's also a ranger station halfway. So you most likely will always see a ranger at some point if you do this loop in a day. And it's a popular spot for day hikers. So the last like 8 miles, you see tons of people out for day hikes as well. But if you are out doing a more remote loop or something off trail, then I would definitely recommend getting some sort of GPS device.
Yeah, and that device also has some, I mean, you have to pay a plan, right? And I think some people shy away from the fact that you have to pay an additional cell phone plan. But the way I just came around it is the willingness to pay when you are out there and you have a problem is going to be as much as you have on your bank account, right? So spending 40, I mean, they have many plans and you can slice it and dice it, but I mean, I paid the $40 plan that gives you X amount of SMS and just gives you that peace of mind that you mentioned. And actually, we had each of us one of the Garmin InReach. So in case there was a problem, we could actually message between each other, and that's a great peace of mind.
Yeah, they're a great piece of equipment. There's the larger one like this. I carried this one, and you message through your phone. You can on this one you can message through it, but your phone is your other piece of equipment required for that. That's great. So the next question is, could you guys go faster? And if you were to go faster, I mean, maybe you're like one and done, but that's always, I think, the question of, did you lay it all on the line? Or since this is both a brand new, the first time you guys had seen the loop, you basically on-sited it, what would you change? And I know Fernando lost a little time. It was about 10 miles to go. So maybe you guys could tell where you think you could improve. And just as a reference, going counterclockwise, you guys, Fernando, you hit the pass, which is about mile 16-ish in 3.5 hours. And EO, you were a I didn't write your time down, 3 something?
It's like 3:40, 3:41. Like
okay,
that.
3:41. So that's right on schedule with Leor's FKT time. So whoever wants to add their, I know EO, you had some pity parties, and Fernando had some.
It was hot. Like mid-July in Kings Canyon is roasting hot, especially in the last 15 miles. Once you start descending the pass and you pass the Ray Lakes, there's a very just exposed, sandy, you're in a canyon, the sun is beating down, it's getting to midday. I had some pity parties in the last 15 miles because part of the difficulty in the last section is actually access to water. It says, yes, you're on the trail that's supposedly by various forks of creeks, but they can often be a cliff away or across a talus field, or it's like a raging waterfall. So your options for getting water are actually kind of limited in the last section of the loop. And I think the heat was definitely a factor in the last half of the loop. The other thing is when you're tackling these routes in the Sierra, for me, it's always hard to get into the mentality of, you know, blinders on, I'm only looking in front of me, I'm trying to go as fast as possible because it's just so beautiful. Like, we're out here, part of the experience is I want to soak in what the landscape looks like. And I stopped a lot of times to take pictures because it was so gorgeous, especially from Glen Pass through Ray Lakes. And also being the first time on this loop, it's like, I'm here because I want to see how beautiful it is. I want to get that experience. And if you're truly head down going for a fast time, you don't get that. It's a totally different experience. Like Fernando knows the way I race is I don't look at anything around me. Like it's total focus on trying to move fast. And I think if I were to do the Ray Lakes Loop again, I would try to choose a day when it's cooler. So maybe either earlier in the season or later in the season going into fall, where you have some better temperatures for running faster. But I think I would still struggle with that idea of not stopping and taking pictures or not stopping and drinking in the view at the top of Glen Pass. Like, it's all part of why we're out there in the first place.
And you always meet the strangest people on the top of that pass every time.
Oh, yes. A lot of interesting people.
Yeah, I mean, I completely concur with you on just you have to soak the views, right? Like, I didn't take pictures because my phone was not that accessible, but I definitely took my time to make sure I enjoyed those views. I think definitely I would prefer to do it not on a weekend because the trail is more crowded on the weekend with all the people that is doing the loop hiking, either finishing it or starting it during the weekend. Maybe in the middle of the week will be a little bit better. And it's just the Glen Pass downhill is rocky. So I did feel bad like running down the trail and you see people with like 40, 50, 60 pound backpacks going up the trail and you're like, just, can you give me some space to run down? I mean, they're always super friendly, but it's not something I like to do. And then, yeah, I also had my pity party, just more electrolyte deficiencies. Like at one point, the electrolytes, I needed more sodium that I was taking and started basically walking. I just I got lost, did a couple of loops where the bridge is down. You have to cross the river. Compared to you, I didn't do that much homework. Like I knew the trail was marked. It's like, okay, one thing we do use, and for me that I think is very important to always bring to the mountain adventures is we have the Gaia app that is basically you download the map and you can locate yourself within the map with your phone. I mean, especially for what you was mentioning, knowing that the river is next to you. Sometimes you hear it, sometimes you don't. Knowing when the next river crossing is coming, like it's very useful to have that sense of the terrain, even when you know it. Like, I mean, when you're tired, you're mile 30, dehydrated. Just having that peace of mind of, having a device that tells you when the next water might come. For me, it was very helpful. Also a little bit hard because when I did those loops around that little hill, the GPS was kind of getting lost. So then I freaked out a little bit. I do think I could go a little bit faster, hopefully below the record. Maybe I'll give it a shot later this summer before the cold starts, but I think it needs to cool off a little bit.
So you guys, your date was actually kind of interesting in that's right at the turning point where you guys didn't have afternoon thunder showers. And literally a week later, the last 10 miles was thunder, sprinkles, fully overcast for me. And I was dying of heat in the same place Io was in the sandy Castle Dome area. And then 2 hours later, I'm getting rained on. So it can change that fast there. And it was I was glad the clouds came in because I was hurting too. But so the one question is about the whole so we're about 40 minutes in here. The FKT, just as there's a lot of philosophies about it, but just so everybody understands, like FKT times are just like a race. It's like you start, the clock starts, and whatever you do on the loop is what you do, and then the clock ends when you finish. There's picture taking and bathroom breaks and all that stuff. You don't get to stop your watch. So the question would be like for an FKT, like is 40 miles kind of like where FKT should start? Because anything less is that really an established route? Like The JMT is a 210, 11 mile. That's a legit in my mind, FKT. But where do we start that number? You guys have any opinions on that?
Mm.
It is a natural loop. I will say, like, this is one of the most natural, loops out there. There's nothing contrived about it. You only repeat 2 miles of the trail.
I mean, I think that, people have talked about things like CRs for a long time, and now with the advent of Strava, people are even more obsessed with whoever has the CR on certain segments or routes or things like that. I think that there's always going to be debate about what distance or what time or what level of difficulty is, quote unquote, legitimate. I mean, at the very basic level, you can have any route from here to there or a loop or something and say, like, whoever does it fastest has the FKT. There is, the fastest known time website, which does a really great job of tracking routes and efforts. And I really think it's wonderful that they are, putting together some rules and regulations and documenting people's efforts. And I think there's, on the website, they list, there's 10 like premier trails for FKTs, premier routes. And I would agree that those are probably the 10 most like impressive or competitive FKTs out there. I think if you ask different people, they might have strong opinions and say, like, oh, something that's 10 miles can't be called an FKT. But the term itself, there's no definition of how long it has to be. Like, personally, I think that if you are going for an FKT, like, I would want to go for something that was going to be long. And people's definition of long might be different. But I think it should be at least an established or well-known route or trail. I think that it should be something that people have done repeatedly throughout time, that it should have some sort of specialness about it, whether it's like Nolan's 14, where you tackle 14 14ers at once, or whether it's a trail with a really long history like the PCT or the Appalachian Trail. I just think that the route should have some meaning and purpose.
That's a very good, thorough answer. I like it. Fernando?
Yeah, I think meaning or purpose, I think that will go for the same thing. Like, has been established route that has history. It has to be, not really, but otherwise we're gonna be doing FKTs on the hill of my house. And yeah, you could do an FKT like it's literally the fastest known time, right? But we need to pick our battles, and I think having something that is well established, that has history and has meaning to the community, I think that would be for me the most important part of selecting a route. But I don't think it's distance. I mean, for me, like, for example, mountain route, like, is that an FKT? Well, maybe it's like a route that we have to climb the highest mountain in Marin. Like, is that meaningful enough? Well, for part of the community, it is, right? Like, I think that's the part that is challenging, is like, there are segments that for communities might be very important, that is not necessarily something that somebody in Colorado cares about. But I think that is the part that is more challenging. Like, how do you discern, like, the meaning would always depend on the community that is looking into that segment. And that maybe is one of the problems.
I think another thing is the I like the idea that at FKT kind of, you take what people do in a normal, so like Ray Lakes Loop normally is a 5-day trip. And if a backpacker heard that you just did it in under 9 hours, it blows their mind. So in my mind, like, that's almost the definition of FKT. You're doing something that is normally, takes much longer for the average person to do. And you've distilled it down to this, extreme time, and it just shows what humans can do. Like the PCT in, 40, what is it? What's the record now? 70 some days. And it takes most people 4+ months to do it. Like it's like always twice as fast kind of concept. So, or the JMT, Francois Dehaene did it in what, sub 3 days?
Yeah.
8 days. Like, can you even comprehend that at the moment?
Oh, no. I mean, it's all about not sleeping. Just the sleep deprivation is insane on that.
Yeah. Hey, we actually have 2 questions, and I think one's pretty easy to answer from Mike Grade. What's the logic behind doing it counterclockwise versus clockwise? And one of you want to answer that one?
So the counterclockwise direction, you climb Glen Pass in a shorter distance. So you have more climbing in the first half of the loop. And I think it was like 17 miles for me from Road's End to the top of Glen Pass. And that's basically your one big climb of the loop. And then you have a beautiful gradual downhill. Well, it's a little steep still at the top of the pass to descend down, but then you get into the Ray Lakes Basin and it's like this super runnable downhill. And then you have a great cruisy section to Upper Paradise. And then you have a couple miles of a steeper descent out of Paradise Valley. But I think it's faster that direction because you have the bigger climb that takes place early when you're fresh. And that section in the back is so runnable. And if you do it as a gradual downhill, you'll go faster than if you do it as an uphill.
Yeah, I mean, you pick the direction, but now that I've done it both ways, I definitely think that that's the way of doing it if you want to go fast.
But if you're backpacking, go clockwise. Gradually get there.
Well, I did the JMT southbound, so there's like that argument that that's not the way. Like the southbound is the hard way of doing it. So yeah, if you do the Ray Lakes only, it's then clockwise.
We have another question from Mike as well. This is for EO to answer. Kareen snagged the SF Crosstown Trail FKT recently. Any interest in beating the time? It's short. It's well short of your preferred distance. It's such a new trail, and it's right here in SF. So it's not only exotic. It's not very exotic or enticing.
I might argue if that one is even a trail. Looking at the route, doesn't seem like a lot of trail miles to me. I think I mean, that's like something that Patty came up with, or is it actually an established route? To me, it seems like a lot of road miles.
I think it is an established route, but Patty
Okay.
was the one that kind of connected the whole thing, and then. But I think it is marked. There is something that I don't know if it's from the city but it is a
Yeah,
trail.
I mean, I might give it a go. I'm way more interested in running in the mountains right now than running through random parts of San Francisco, to be honest. But we'll see. I will definitely have to do a test run because there's a lot of turns.
Got it. It is still, they're both wild places.
I'm sure you see a lot of interesting things on the Crosstown Trail too.
I'm sure your cell phone will work the entire way on the Crosstown Trail. So we're at, we planned about 45 minutes. And if anybody else in the audience has any questions, go ahead and type them in.
There was a question in the chat from Bonnie that said, what was the app you used for GPS location? So we use this app called Gaia GPS, GAIA, and it's awesome. You can make routes on it so that you can see whether you're on or off your planned route. You can pre-download maps with all different types of layers like USGS topo or open hiking or other trail marking maps. And then once you download them to your phone, then you don't need connectivity to get a lot of detail when you're out in the wilderness. And your phone is the location device, and you'll see your exact location. And also, you can use it as a compass. So your phone has a compass, and when you turn it around, the little arrow will show you what direction you're pointing. I have used that a lot before the trail.
Yeah, and I mean, it costs as well, but the same thing. It's as the InReach Mini, I think even more. Like paying those $20 a year, I think now they have a premium, double premium thing that is like $40 a year. I mean, that's the best $40 I spend the whole year, because the 2 times that I get saved by Gaia in my adventures, that is worth $40 for sure.
All right, I think if there's no more questions in the chat or the Q&A, I think we will call it a wrap here. Thanks guys for joining, and I think Fernando, if you're willing, in a couple of weeks we can talk JMT.
Yeah, for sure.
Once the pain has left your body and your
Well, I think not only do you have to get Fernando to talk about it, but you have to get his 2 companions.
He went through.
So this is the insanity of Fernando on the JMT. He went through 2 people. Like, one person had to do the first half with him, and one person had to do the second half with him. And I think they were both pretty destroyed at the end.
Right. Well, we'll plan that out again. We got now that I got the Zoom thing all figured out. I think we can make it happen. So cool. Thank you very much. And I did record this, so we'll see if we can post this up somewhere, so if people want to watch it later. Great, guys. Thanks, and see you later.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.